Hi, my name is Lauren Clark. I'm 17 and I'm a junior in high school. My fight story just started off with me in 6th grade. I had struggled a lot with anxiety and depression. It was to the point where I couldn't necessarily take it anymore. My parents didn't know the best way to help me at home. They decided that it was the best decision for me to go to a residential treatment center in Utah. I was gone for a total of 19 months. I went to 3 different programs. Each one of them was different in their own ways. But first, I went to a hospital. I was really just struggling. I was like, if there is a God, then why would he do this to me? Why would he take me away from my friends? Why would he take me away from my family? Why would he just take away my life? I really didn't know what to do at that point, and I just kind of shut down. I guess my realization that it was actually there to help me was probably 4 months into my journey. That's when I was like, this is just making me happier, and I had never been genuinely happy. My third place was probably my most beneficial place. When I first got there, I met a horse named Tyson, and he was kind of my saving grace. So he played a huge role in kind of my journey, and just Utah in general, it was a gorgeous place. The house that I was in was kind of on the side of a mountain, and I could look out and I would be like, oh my gosh, this is gorgeous. And I called my mom at one point. I was like, this looks like a painting. And she was like, it's God's creation. And I was like, yeah, I guess it is. Maybe God is a good thing, whatever. But one day on a plane going back to Houston, I was listening to music and the song Reckless Love came on. At that point, I was just like, I don't know why I had any doubt. I just was like, oh my gosh, he loves me no matter what, and it doesn't matter what I do or what I say. There's nothing that can stop him from loving me endlessly. And whenever it says he leaves the 99, I was like, I'm that one that went off, and he's coming to get me right now. I didn't hear a voice or anything, but I was like, this is the moment. I was like, this is God.
Hey guys, welcome to Fight For It. My name's Tim, and we're excited to go through a 7-session series with each other, trying to figure out what it is we're fighting against, what we're fighting for, who are we even fighting. A lot of questions will be answered as we go through this series, but first I want to tell a story. In late 2018, my family was ecstatic about a pregnancy of a new baby. It was my wife, and I had 2 daughters at that point. And I was super excited because this one was a baby boy. But I'll never forget what happened on February 24th, 2019. It was just a normal Sunday morning, so I was with my student ministry group, and I was teaching on a series in the book of Jonah. And when I got done teaching, we split for small groups, and a volunteer came up to me and said, hey Tim, your wife needs you. She's in tears, she's in the restroom, I think it's an emergency. And so obviously that took me by surprise. And so I go, I knock on the door, make sure no one's in there. Sure enough, I find my wife crying in the bathroom saying, I think my water just broke. And while that's exciting for some in the pregnancy process, it was really heartbreaking for us because she was only 23 weeks pregnant at that time. And so we dropped what we were doing at church. We rushed to the Women's Hospital of Texas, and they put us in this tiny dark room in a section of the hospital that I've never seen or heard before called the Maternal Assessment Center. And honestly, in that moment, fear started to drown both my wife and I, because the doctors and the nurses just kept communicating every situation, every scenario that could have happened. And honestly, it was bad news after bad news after bad news. Because at that point, my son was barely 1 pound. And they were being honest with us, just telling us the severity of the situation. They gave my son about a 75% chance that he would be born in the next 24 to 48 hours. And the realistic best chance of this scenario was that they can maybe prolong the birth for another 2 weeks. But even then, if best case scenario, 2 weeks, there'd be so many complications within my son because the lugs weren't developed yet. He had no fluid. There was a long fight ahead of us no matter what. And in that room, I kept it cool because I knew I needed to be strong for my wife in this moment. But when I left that tiny room to update our family and our friends about our situation, I lost it, man. Grown man tears everywhere. I was full of fear, and I was really sad. I was fearful for my son's life. I was sad for what my wife was going to have to go through in that moment, and no matter how long it took, I knew it was going to be a fight. And this life of ours just took this huge turn in a matter of one tiny moment on a normal Sunday morning. And so what I want to ask each one of us is, can one moment change your life too? And in that moment, we had all the odds stacked against us. My wife and I had a choice to make. Would we either be a victim of our circumstance, or would I put all that fear into the hands of my Savior and allow Him to work within our lives, to give me a message? Would I stay down in defeat, or could I lean and learn how to fight for my wife, how to fight for my son, how to fight for my family, and ultimately how to better put my trust in God even when it's totally out of my control? And what we want to do over these next few sessions is I want to teach y'all how to fight. I want us to learn what it looks like for us to fight in our everyday lives. Because if you just look around in this world, it's so easy to be down in defeat or drowning in fear. At a very macro level, you look at our world and it's so broken. You watch the news, you check social media, you get on Instagram, whatever the case may be, you see that all this time, even in the past few years, right, we've gone through a huge Me Too movement in the life of our teenagers, right? A global pandemic hits. There's political divides in the adults in our lives, in our families, in our homes, and even in our schools. Right? School shootings were happening at a regular rate at this point. There's just deaths at a recent music festival in our city, just et cetera, et cetera. There's so much down to be fearful and to be scared of. But the famous saying that I believe is true, and a lot of what we're going to be processing over the next few sessions in this series is that it's always darkest before the dawn. That right now, I believe that we are in some dark days, but even in the dark is when the light shines the brightest, right? God used this fight, this low, this fearful moment in my life personally. In that moment, I had the prospect of knowing the possibility of never being able to hold that baby boy that I was so excited about. And it unraveled me, and it began to expose some things that I leaned on that weren't worthy of my trust, right? God used this low place to revive me, to strengthen me, and ultimately to deepen my worship for Him, because my son stayed in the womb, not for 2 weeks, not for 4 weeks, but for 12 weeks, and was born without any complications. And at the very beginning, they gave that about a 5% chance of happening. But in that process, my wife and I grew closer together. We gained so much friendships and influence in that hospital. And in this fight, I just gained this whole new perspective on how to trust God and how to walk with Him and how to manage even my stress and my low moments better. Right? Our story, our fights that we go through is not too dissimilar from what happened in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Old Testament. And if you're not familiar, don't worry. Over the next few sessions, we're going to go through this story of Ezra and Nehemiah, and it's a story of restoration. It's a story of revival. It's a story of the kingdom of God advancing even in the darkest, lowest moments. So the temple of the Lord, the walls of the city of Jerusalem, the hearts of the people of the land were lying in ruin. And this nation of Israel is at its lowest point. But God, right? That's His story. He shows up in the low moments. And with any great opportunity, it's always going to bring great opposition. Nehemiah chapter 4, opposition starts to come against Nehemiah wanting to rebuild these walls of Jerusalem. And this is the words of Nehemiah, what he says. He says, I looked and I rose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of the opposition. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers. Fight for your sons. Fight for your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Right? Before we dig into this story over the next few sessions, we want to learn about what God was up to, how He used this man in Nehemiah to bring revival to this broken city. And we need to do some soul searching ourselves to figure out a few things. What are we fighting for? For whom are you fighting, right? What do you believe is worthy of your fight? And so I believe as we go through this series, we want to unlock this idea of fighting in your life, you personally. Apply this to you in your life as a 12-year-old middle schooler or as a 16-year-old high schooler. All right, 2 quick convictions that we want to get you to understand as this conversation starts is that 1, you are a person of influence. You have effect on what happens in your home, in your schools, your math class, your clubs, your teams. You have been given unique abilities that God has given you specifically. And you have talents that are needed in other people's lives. and you have treasure that has been entrusted to you by God, and you have a skill set that your community needs. God has crafted you to be a person of influence, and you can use this influence for good, or you can use it for bad. You can use it to lift others up, or you can use it to tear down that girl that's annoying or that boy that gets on your nerves, right? We can tear other people down with our influence, or we can exalt others, right? That is the power of influence, and every single one of y'all have that. The second thing is that you, whether you know it or not, are in a fight. We're all in a fight. This ring isn't what makes a fighter good. It's all the preparation that happens outside of this ring beforehand is what makes you a good fighter. And so I want you to know now that you are in a fight. And I hope that this series is all that we can do to train each other up, to rise up, to be good fighters. So unless we know what it is we're fighting for or who we're even fighting against and what we believe is even worth fighting for, we won't pay the price necessary to win the fight outside the ring. We got to start that process now. So I want you to start processing, reflecting, so that you can clearly articulate what are you fighting, for whom are you fighting, and what do you believe is worthy of your fight. Now at the end of each lesson, we want you, wherever you're watching, to process these questions that we've asked from the lesson, but also just process the questions where you're making this super applicable to you. What it is that you're fighting for. So if you're meeting with friends, if you're meeting with your small group, if it's just you in your room, process these things and apply this to your life.